Back, everyone. Another episode of Grow Your Path to Wellness. If you're new here, Amanda and I, we host a wellness guest every Sunday, and that's when our new episodes come out. So be sure to subscribe and follow us so you don't miss out on anything new. If you missed last week, Lisa Schaefer, she returned with us and covered the solar plexus chakra. We talked all about the impact of trauma and tips for unblocking this chakra. This week, we have another installment of our Mandown Men's Mental Health series, and we have Evan the Counselor returning, and of course, Tommy's returning with us. So Evan, he's going to be, offering a unique perspective, being a male working in the mental health profession. So welcome back, Evan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Yeah, a few months ago, Evan and I had a good conversation about trauma and addiction, and so you'll have to go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already. But I'm loving this Mandown Men's Mental Health series. I'm so thankful to have an emotionally intelligent husband that wants to talk about these topics. It's a beautiful thing. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Tommy.
Yeah, hello everybody, and we're going to kind of take the same approach as we do every week and just really get into a natural conversation about some of the things that are in this realm, in this area. I'm going to play the part as just another guy. Now we have three professionals, so I'll try not to be on the defensive with all the counselors here. But I'll step aside and let Evan introduce himself. So can you tell us about yourself, Evan?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my background, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and licensed addiction counselor in Minnesota. So I currently have a practice, and I also manage companies that do housing for people coming out of treatment, managing a group practice, and so that's kind of my day job. And then by night, I make content. So I've been doing that the last 6 to 9 months, and where I met you lovely people on TikTok primarily, but also YouTube and some of the other social media. So that's kind of been my newest novelty project that is taken on a mind of its own. But that's the general gist. So yeah, basically just doing education and addiction, mental health space, and putting some entertaining flares to it now and again. So yeah, that's
a few costumes here and there,
a few wigs, other of humiliating myself. Yeah, I've never owned so many wigs in my life. I'm up to 2. So new record for me on wigs. Yeah.
So, kind of looking and taking a bit of an aim, what we've typically done in the past, and I was going to take a little bit of a different approach to start off the conversation today, is we generally kind of talk about some of the things that, we're suffering with and we're going through. And not that I want to minimize that, but I want to take a little bit of a curveball angle on this and kind of ask, Evan, what do you think from the men's mental health perspective that men are doing wrong to not help themselves? Like, what are we doing to ourselves that's keeping us in this, allowing the stigma to sit just in our social group or our area, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think there's the classic answer, and that is, as men, we're taught about, like in just like women are in their own way, we're taught by our parents, and even in a broader sense by society, of how to survive in this environment. And for a very long time, of our hundreds of thousands of years, pretty much all of it, there was this element of, the necessity to be strong, to be tough. And those are things that, even though we like to think we're so enlightened, are still part of our programming, of our indoctrination into society, is these old means of survival, in this harsh world, and these things still get reinforced. These stereotypes of masculinity, and I'm not one who's like, we need to completely dismantle the whole system, and men need to completely, soften themselves 1000% and be, you know, and just completely get rid of everything. But I think that we do internalize, you know, that you have that buzzword of like toxic masculinity. But I think there are things that are, you know, taken too far. And I think that puts a lot of stress on men, especially in how much society has evolved, that we don't need these things anymore, that were maybe necessary for survival. You know, it comes with a cost. And I think, you know, if you look at, you know, like our grandparents' generation or something like that, you know, when there was, you know, much more, you know, or maybe different types of adversity, you know, the typical thing for men to do is like, you know, to get through this tough world, you need to shut down, turn your emotions off. You need to, you know, take life as it comes, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, be tough, and, you know, and close yourself off emotionally, and, you know, have a few drinks at night. And that's just what life is. And I think it set that expectation a little bit lower. And I think there are advantages to that, right? It's like, you can't hurt me if I put that wall up. But what I'll tell to men is that there is that trade-off. If I'm totally closed off emotionally, if I keep that to myself, you know, or like the Simon and Garfunkel song, you know, like, I'm a rock, I'm an island, and that's exactly what that was about, is like a man being alone, and it may not just be not having people around, but being alone on your own emotional island, right? Can't hurt me, but at the same time, you're closing yourself off to a lot of the beauty that's out there, when you don't where you don't take those emotional risks. And then there's the overt toxic elements as well of just stress, by not having some of those uh, supports and allowing yourself to be open, you know, internalizing, putting pressure on yourself to be strong, tough, always have it together, to have to be the provider, to, you know, internalizing it. It's exhausting, and it puts a lot of stress, and, you know, and then there's actual mortality, right, by, you know, notoriously not going to the doctor. So yeah, that would be my general synopsis of men. I've never really thought of that, but
there's a recent experience I had, and it's just one experience, and my sample set when I bring topics to the table are very small, so I can't say, and I always try to asterisk that, you know, not speaking for the demographic, but it feels common around my groups, my areas, where I work, you know, the people I'm around, my family members, things like that. I've recently been battling with, you know, this ebbs and flows of imposter syndrome. As a man, I'm in my field and I'm working and I'm dealing with this imposter syndrome. And it's been giant. It's like I can't stop thinking about it and trying to put it together, analytical thinking, trying to solve the puzzle. I'm working through this, and every out feels uncomfortable. Every single out of figuring out how to manage it, other than just bury it inside as deep as I can and keep powering forward. So that's that, like you said, that toxic, the stress level instantly increases, right? Spikes right through the roof. And I'm going through this, and even, you know, related to this podcast, this is very uncomfortable for me personally, because I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe talking about what's going on with me anywhere, pretty much anywhere. But I've grown and I'm educated, and I understand now, like, I need to, but I'm fascinated by this overcoming this fear. And I can't help but wonder if this is one of the giant barriers that might help really tear down a large corner of the stigma, to help people free themselves up to actually start improving. Like, how can we make people feel safe? You know, and the first thing that the option I took in that moment when it came to work and my imposter syndrome is I did some research. I watched a few podcasts. There was a TED talk that I really liked. So I sent it out to my entire team, all the people that work for me. And I said, hey, you know, I think we all face this. I can't imagine I'm alone in this, but here's something in case you do that might help you go forward. That was my attack. My attack was immediately to help other people. So I want to know, you know, I'm curious, you know, what do you think about, or Amanda or Kelsey, what do you think is helpful to try to get people to, just a common man, just the man that's out there struggling, that never talks about what's going on, that needs to heal, needs to break down the stigma. We need to start moving, like Evan said, into the new, where we're at now, get out of biblical times, get out of the Neanderthal thinking of we have to do X, Y, and Z, pound our chests, you know. So what are the thoughts on how we can help men, even myself right now, I'm like shaky just talking about it, feel safe to talk about this? Like, why does it feel so uncomfortable? Or is that really down to an individual person? It just feels like it's more collective than that.
It is. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I just had like a quick comment, and I immediately, the first thing that came into my head when you told me that you sent that out to like all of your team that you work with was how, like, to ask you how vulnerable or how like uncomfortable that made you feel to put something that resonated with you personally out there. And I'm sure, I don't want to assume that those are safe people for you that you work with by being coworkers, but that's, I feel like, to give yourself credit.
It was still terrifying. And what was interesting is doing it felt right. But then I was caught in this conflict for days, probably a little bit still lingering of, I don't know if I made a mistake doing that. Did I open up too much? Did I expose myself? Am I weak now to the team, to the people that I have to lead? Or do they now see me as weak? And you know, you get into a place like that in the, you know, corporate environment, they may go through it and may help them, may not. But there's no real feedback loop, so you can't reinsure, you know. But I need, you know, you want the confidence to just do stuff like that and be okay with it, move on, right? It seems like you three have found a way to do it super effectively. Evan, you seem like you're having a lot of success in like even just your TikTok. Looking at the numbers and the videos you have, and it's impressive. Like, you know, it seems like you might have conquered it. So,
oh man, so there's a lot there. So, you know, some great thoughts, you know, that you all bring up, and I think, look, I think right now there's a big overcorrection. You can almost hear how you maybe put a little pressure on yourself, like I have to just shed myself 100% of this masculinity and become this like super enlightened, new age, like vulnerable, you know, kind of guy. And I don't know, I'm more someone who likes to find a balance and also acknowledge it, and that some of these things were there for a reason. Some of this as men, I do believe, is built into our biology. Maybe it's just evolution. It served a purpose, right? This is not just, you know, some of these male stereotype, typical characteristics did not just come out of nowhere. Like, these were often necessary for our survival. And, you know, right, to survive on the savannas and hunt and, you know, deal with just a harsh reality. And not that women haven't had to do that, you know, it's like, it just, existence is very harsh for different reasons, right, in that typical societal structure. And, you know, now that we have the luxury that, you know, we have a grocery store that we could stop, that we could do more of these Maslow's tip of the spear hierarchy of working towards more enlightenment. Some of us have that, right? I get to sit in my office and talk to people for a living and make silly TikTok videos, but not everyone has that luxury. I mean, some people are working 12, 16-hour a day, hard jobs, hard on their body. You know, and there does need to be an element of some mental toughness. And this is what I'll tell the guys, like, look, you don't have to shed that completely, but can you give yourself a little break, to give yourself a little room, to whether that's finding one other person? Because I think what happens with guys is we're all yearning for this, right? We all have this like emotion ourselves that's like being like imprisoned in our basement. And you know, every guy has it and they all want to come out at once, but everyone's like afraid to do that. And sometimes it just takes one person to allow themselves to bring that up, or to send, like you did, or to send that email. Because I think every guy, you know, they're all afraid that you know, what if I do this? How is everyone going to judge me? And it's like a standoff. And sometimes I think it just takes one person, and especially a leader, sounds like maybe you're in a leadership role, to do that and set the culture. And that is so important, whatever, you know, group of men that you're with. I mean, men, I think, you know, in general have this yearning, this desire to be with other men, right? For the something like, I don't know if you ever heard of like Sebastian Younger, but he talks a lot about this. He's like, he's the one who wrote, I believe, like The Perfect Storm, and he wrote, and I didn't get to read the book, but I've heard him talk about this, called Tribe, where just like men in like a military sense, it's like we're built like to have this mission, this camaraderie, but within that, like even in like a military structure, there is this like these really deep bonds that emotionally form when you are provided with this task. And it's like we have this built into us. And I think if you have someone like a strong leader who's able to change that culture, be like, look, it's okay. We could be men. We could be a little competitive. We can, we could give each other shit. We could try to outdo each other. But at the end of the day, we need to be, if we do that all the time and we shut ourselves off emotionally, there's going to be consequences for that. Mm-hmm. And being okay emotionally, to have those emotional and to turn that off. It's like we just need to be able to turn that off and take a bigger perspective and have more of those vulnerable connections, and then we could go back to that and not take everything so seriously, because then you start to develop that imposter syndrome. You internalize that and it makes you feel bad about yourself. So I think that's really cool that you did that, and I think as men, we have to do that with confidence as well, to be like, you know what, like, because, men respect that from other men, especially their leaders. I think like we're very, as a species, we're a pack species and we're very hierarchical too. So I think sometimes if you have someone who's, a little bit higher up in a leadership role doing that, then everybody else falls in. And I sometimes tweak it a little bit too with my reluctant men, where I say, well, what's harder for you, right? Is it harder for you to just keep doing what you're doing, avoid to harbor it in? Or is it more of a challenge? Is it more hard? Is it more difficult for you to allow yourself to open up to someone else, to face your emotion? Oh, well, the latter. Okay, so
absolutely.
Like you got to just
absolutely
kind of
the latter
system a little bit and be like, okay, so being a man, like, are you up for the challenge? Are you man enough to? I think it's best to, this is only last resort, but yeah, I mean, I think framing it in that way too, of like, okay, if being a man means doing the hard thing and challenging yourself, like, let's see if you could conquer this challenge. What are you scared? You're not man enough to be vulnerable? Sometimes you got to just tweak the system a bit.
Yeah, with any change, we have to move through the discomfort. That's the only way you get to the other side. So I love that. And, like just kind of bouncing off what you said, praising for sending that email out. Tommy, you asked, what do you do to make people feel safe? That's exactly it. Like sending that email out is validating for everybody else, their own internal struggle. And so that's where you create, like Evan said, the culture of safety.
Yeah.
Right. And all of it felt naturally right the whole time. Like it was like, yeah, I got to do this, with no real reluctance to do it. It went right out. I made time, made sure it went out. But the entire time, it's wild to really kind of self-analyze and feel all these different things that were going on. Right. And it was just like trying to put a pin in them. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean? I want to understand this. I want to know how I can improve, change, evolve, all these things. And it's just even in talking about it now, the whole thing, the confidence piece you mentioned, that's interesting because it's having confidence and being vulnerable seems almost too conflicting from the perspective that I feel like I'm coming from, or I feel like men tend to come from when they're just kind of striving and going through, like you had mentioned, what's harder, right? And in all cases, almost all cases that I've ever experienced, even including every one of the awesome men that have been on this series, they strap their boots up, they go to work. It's fine, and then the bad part, like you said earlier, though, is it buries, and then it ends up causing you to have serious health impacts, and you're dealing with stress, and the worse than that, we're just perpetuating the cycle. And it's really just, how do we unplug that clash, right? Be vulnerable while also being confident. How do we do that and maintain the proper the masculinity that is beneficial and that is just part of the nature without the destruction of the pieces that we've adapted for survival, right? How do we detach those? It's always in my head.
Yeah, and I think that's the best, like what you did, I think is like I mean, something like that could be so powerful. And I sort of like men are so hierarchical in that way, predictable. Like, I swear to God, like if you went in with your chest up and you're a leader and people respect you, and you came in with a dress, you said, "Look, boys, it's okay to wear a dress," and everyone would look up and be like, "He says it's okay to wear a dress,"
Right.
He was so confident about, you have everyone wearing a dress the next day. I think there is something to that, we really, I think, men, and I hate, like, and it just feels weird to bring up some of these stereotypes, but I think we've gone so far away that we just want to scrap everything and not acknowledge that there are some parts about male culture. And I think some of it comes from biology, probably 50-50, maybe less even, but a good chunk comes from our biology and our evolution and survival. And then, and again, not everybody who's a man necessarily, a very good percent don't really, a lot of that doesn't feel right for them, they aren't interested in football, or they don't want, not like, they're not interested in a lot of these like stereotypical male pursuits. But, I think it is important to acknowledge that it is a thing, and that, we are drawn in general to some of these things. Now, I think with that, the importance of culture shift, and you were asking, how do we start to shed ourselves of some of those things? I heard, and I think this guy would be a great person for you to have on the podcast if you get him. There's a guy, Dan Griffin. Maybe you should check. I think you would enjoy his work, but he's in the addiction community, and he wrote a book called like The Men's Way Through the 12 Steps. And I saw a presentation. He does such a good presentation on this, talking about men and addiction. Because, it's like I think about these guys, right, the day laborers who, work all day. They imbibe these like, typical masculine way. And it's like, well, what do they do? They drink, like at the end of the day. And so it's like we have a couple choices. We could, let ourselves be open up emotionally, or we could just close off and drink. And alcohol is such a great numbing agent that men have historically used, and women too, obviously. But so he does a presentation, and it's pretty funny. So it's like a room of us clinicians, and this guy comes in. There's men, there's women. I don't want to get too vulgar, but like the first thing he does is he'll say, when you think of being a man, what are the rules? He calls them man rules. Like, what are the rules? And they'll start, you'll kind of start off soft, like, be strong. And then and he kind of like guides you to get to this point where it's like super like vulgar, where like not all of them are, but like something like have sex with as many women as possible, right? With a, certain kind of genitalia, with, and not, with women, not men, right? Mm-hmm. And as you start to think about it, you're like, oh yeah, like that does make sense. There would be this like all of these things that you're talking about. And at the end of the day, there's like 50 of these rules, and it's all like, be tough. And I mean, F a lot of women with a big D, not men. Like you just go to it and you're just like, holy shit. And then at the end of the day, like you start to see some of these are like really contradictory as well. It's like, be like as strong as possible, but also be humble. You look at it, you're like, oh my God, that's like maddening. And for women, it's, there's going to be their own things, like be pretty 24/7. Like there's all these like pressures on women as well from this like very, very stereotypical lens. It's just a different kind of bad, right? And so then you come in, let's say, to treatment. You go into drug and alcohol treatment, and you have these rules in your head, and then what do we tell you, right? And this is something I think therapists need to be extremely mindful of, because especially are more enlightened, and female therapists, we have these guys come in and we're like, okay, so here's what we got to do, here's what's on your treatment plan, we're gonna be vulnerable, we're gonna drop all of these things, and you're like, whoa. And I think men, they can't even verbalize, because there's these rules in our heads and we know them, but we don't ever see them on the whiteboard and see how crazy it is. And then there's fear in that, because like, think about it, let's say growing up on the streets of Brooklyn or something, if you're going out, going around and being like, oh, I'm gay, or it's like, you're gonna, like, you wear the wrong piece of clothing that's like, you wear like a colorful like handkerchief, like you're gonna get your ass kicked, for like wearing a handkerchief. It doesn't take much, to have that societal pressure, and that's, it's like what our parents, our grandparents will teach us, like, don't be gay, don't, like, and it comes from a place of, we want you to be safe. And so you're asking a lot of men coming in to right off the bat just drop all of it. It's really scary, and I think that has to be acknowledged. And I think you have to make the case to them why that is, and not try to push it too far and be like, yeah, you have to, be this like enlightened hippie, and drop everything and totally feminize yourself.
Right, like we're trying to find the right marketing scheme to make everybody say, hey, yeah, you need this. This is good for you. This is beneficial. This is going to be a great future for you.
Yeah, there has to be that disarming. And I think that is a problem of what I see in the field as well, of not acknowledging that, because I think the anecdote's still the same, but for a lot of men coming in, especially ones who are reluctant to get services, and what the good thing is, you're seeing more men coming in. I got a lot more guys who eventually they just can't take it anymore. These tough guys, they just, and especially with, because like before they could get away with it, it's like, okay, I got a good enough paying job, I could support my family, I make a wage, I come home, I drink with the boys, I got my kids, and you just go through life and it's fine. There's the trade-off. But nowadays, with a lot of those jobs going away, more substance use, opiate use, just harsher, I think that luxury isn't there quite in the same way that it was before. So I think a lot more men are coming to treatment, but I think as clinicians, we need to realize what's coming in, and that we can't just go right for, quote, feminizing right away. Understand how that could be dysregulating for a guy. And people come in with different levels of this, right? I mean, if you have your 25-year-old who has their bachelor's degree from a liberal arts school, I think they're going to be a little more open to it. But, especially if you have someone who comes from that culture, an honor culture, who has imbibed more of these, who's been more sensitive and imbibing these messages, who had a father who was a hard ass, who beat them, who really have these deep instilled core beliefs. I just think we have to be more mindful of that as a profession. But that doesn't mean you get a pass. I think you still have, like you said, with like the marketing, and you really have to. I think you really have to make the case to a guy, especially. You have to sit him down and be like, "Here's why." And I think guys were, and these are just generalizations, and not everyone comes in with these stereotypes. But I think sometimes if you can make the case, like I could think of some of like the harder guys that have come in. And they'll ask me, like they'll almost like debate me, like in a way because they want to see if my argument holds up. Okay, why do I need to be vulnerable? And sometimes even just doing that and appealing to their logic and being like, okay, how has this worked for you? How is this coping strategy? What was it that brought you here, right? Why are you here right now? And selling it to them. I've seen that work with some guys, and they say, okay, yeah, we could do this gradually. No, you don't have to go all the way this way. You could hold on to some of these things that have kept you safe, but maybe these are the ones that you would benefit. These traits would be the ones to work on. That'll give you the most bang for your buck, so to speak, where you don't have to go all the way. I don't know. I found that to be helpful with some of those more masculine, stereotypical clients.
Yeah, they don't have to like put the dress on right away.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you think about, you're talking about the biological, evolutionary, socialized, the traits that we've kind of taken on as a society, gender wise. And then you add, and those keep us safe. And you're like talking about what ones have kept us safe that we can let go, and what ones you can hold on to, that balance. And then you add trauma and the things that have kept people safe through trauma on top of that already. And I think that just, I don't know. I don't really have a question. Just I'm thinking, those things are already biologically innate in us and we're fighting battles every day to work through it. And then you add on someone that's been through trauma and had to keep themselves safe with all these other coping mechanisms and boundaries and walls. And it's like, we're asking a whole lot of people. So I think that too, just giving ourselves grace in the moment to realize what we're really asking of ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And with, looking at it through that trauma lens, men, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on women and the stereotypes and some of the toxic messaging and the trauma from that. And it's just, a little bit different for men. It's like we all have that. And yeah, for men, I think it pushes in, it's like trauma pushes us further into these extremes. And maybe for women that looks different, for men that looks different. And a lot of that trauma, like, kind of like physical violence, fights, abuse from father, like those kind of, and I think and I've noticed that, maybe you all have noticed this too, but I think some of the biggest parental traumas come from the parent of the same sex. Not that guys don't have a lot of mom issues and girls dad issues, but I think there's like a unique importance of the modeling of the parent who's of the same sex. And that really sets a template for how you view and interact the world, looking at it through a gender lens. And we could look through life in all these different lenses, but looking at it through a gender lens, which is a really big part of who we are and how much, because of just how much. And in that presentation, I was telling about that Dan, that he kind of does that like classic fish joke of, hey, the fish says to the other fish, how's the water? And like, what's water? It's like, that's gender, where it's everything is gendered in our culture. And it's so important, so much so that we don't even realize what's going on. And when you break those rules, and even some of the most sensitive among us, when you break those rules, there are consequences for it, even if they're not blatantly stated. And I think a lot of men society reinforces those stereotypes. And I think, and it's maybe a little controversial to say this, but of course not all women, but I think women also reinforce men for that as well, where we feel like we have to be strong, or if we, let's say in like a dating environment, if we show vulnerability, they're like, right? Like, I don't know, there's still that, general, and again, there's a lot of people who are much more enlightened and have worked on that. And I think one example, I did a video on this a while ago. I think it really goes to show where we're at. And because I think a lot of women would like to argue with me on this. We're like, that's not true. Like, no, I want the sensitive guy, or no, I like the nice guy. But at the end of the day, most guys could tell you in the dating scene, they're like, no, when I show that vulnerability, I get rejected, or they view me as weak. And I think there's a statistic, I don't know the exact number, but it's something between like 60 to 80% of women. And I mean, this is among them, like the college educated and enlightened and liberal, and they would not date a guy that's bisexual. They wouldn't even consider it. It's like 60 to 80, but if you really hold their feet to the fire, for men, it's much, more different. Like a female is bisexual, it's viewed differently. But a man who's ever slept with a man almost becomes this like, they're like blacklisted or whatever. because of how feminizing that is. And I've kind of done this with some of my female friends where I'll ask them, like, would you ever, some of my most liberal LGBT friendly, and they'll sometimes, if they're honest with me, they'll say, yeah, no, that would really mess with my head, because they're then just viewed as gay, or it's just very feminizing and unsexy. So as much as we like to think, oh, it's just men who are imbibing these stereotypes and they need to change, I think this is a society, including women, we need to challenge those preconceived notions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's almost, I wonder if it plays to that same light at the way that men have that natural, like we've developed over time with our species, that we have these measures we have to live up to, and women have measures that they need to live up to too. And that's, it seems almost like it's just that natural thing to require that strong caveman to make sure that the dinosaurs don't come into my cave and eat me and my children, and I wonder if that holds. But interesting still, as you're talking, Evan, I'm thinking, like, is this how evolution works? Is it just a slow roll? Is it just us eventually evolving because of the environment? Is it us eventually evolving out of absolute necessity? Or have we ever faced a time in civilization where we had these conversations before and we were able to force a bit of an evolution or change? Not a societal, because this seems way deeper than a societal function. If we're talking about carrying over natural instincts and the basic way we are based on, our sex or our gender, the way the society doesn't help, but we seem to be carrying over things that we've had when we were walking around in caves.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. It's super fascinating to me anyway.
So so there's a lot of controversy out there, and you'll hear this in the public discourse about, and again, I'm kind of like a centrist on just about everything, right? Where some people are like, no, this is all society. This is not our evolution. This is not how we're built. Men are built the same. It's all culture. And then the other side's like, no, it's all biology. And the way I view it, I think some of these stereotypes, these commonalities, societal messaging, whatever, it comes from something that's real, right? It comes from something biological. It's just cranked up, right? And that's why, like an example of like LGBTQ, gay men, right? Like there's a lot of people that do not fit into that stereotype, trans, right? And there's a lot of gay men who are like, love all the hyper masculine things in football. And, it's so complicated at the end of the day. But before, we just kept it really simple. If you're a man, in general, most men are cool with football and like the competitiveness. And it's not this like uphill battle, but for a good percent of them, they're like, we're like, no, it's just like not how we are. I'm not like hyper competitive. I don't love football. I don't. But you get pushed into these categories, and you have that percentage of men who this just doesn't feel right for them, right? Feeling like there's something missing. And even then those guys who take it too far and they're like, yeah, I'm a man, we're gonna close the emotions down. There's consequences, there's emotional consequences, physical consequences for doing that as well. So I think these come from a very real place. And you don't have to go to caveman times to see how this could be beneficial. Like life is, in general, is very harsh. Like go back 100 years. Like you need to have some grit, like to get through some of the disease and this and working hard, physical labor, and like you need to have some of those things. And yeah, going back to hunting times, right? Like you needed to be strong, fit to survive, to hunt, to get your next meal. And that was essential for society, right? Just like some of the typical female roles of like needing to, have, that's where some of like the looks and fertility and, and that's where a lot of these things come from. They just get hyper exacerbated, and we just get pushed into one of two. Now you're seeing this open up where, hey, there's a lot more options along the gender and sexuality spectrum that you could choose from. And that's dysregulating for people who are more conservative minded. And I don't necessarily mean conservative, there is a correlation there, but for more conservative, traditional minded people, it's very dysregulating for them to see all this like whoa, these rules are getting, go to, I was we had our Pride Festival a little late this year, and just like you going through and being like, have someone from 100 years ago, and just like their brain would literally explode. So I think it does come from a very real place, and I think we do a disservice by completely dismissing that and just being like, oh, this is just men being having toxic masculinity. It really dismisses something that's very real and very important for men, that it's not so easy to just give those things up. And then women, society in general, often punish men for doing that. They may say one thing, but men get punished for being soft sometimes too, oftentimes, by not just other men.
I was gonna, like, that female perspective, like 100%. Like if you ask, women that question, those questions we were talking about, and then you factor in that aspect of safety and like evolution and things. And for us, we've had that conditioning and that programming, that those things to look for in a partner are what keep us safe. And then what men are, these behaviors and what they're doing are the things that, are keeping them safe. And we're all holding on to like these rules. When you said earlier, the word maddening, we're holding on to things that are absolutely maddening and expecting to feel safe.
Yeah.
And the structure, I think because things are becoming more progressive, and it's causing that reactivity that you mentioned, Evan, like people, the more conservative mindset, not just politics, but just that perception of gender and the binary and things like that. It's very fascinating to see. Like, I feel like we're so polarized right now and just reacting at one another. And I feel like it's making nobody feel safe and just threatened all the time.
And I wonder if it's just a matter of slowing the hell down, right? Like, we spent so much time throughout, the ages of humanity constantly pushing forward and constantly running from a predator, or thriving to build a society, or take power over this other person, or conquer this territory, and we're moved forward at light speed. I mean, everything just goes crazy, and it booms and it busts, but it's almost like we've just become cogs in the machine and forgot that we are driving the machine. We have our hands on the steering wheel, and coming back to center may be one of the best starts for every bit of change, instead of like trying to tear things apart and saying this is right, this is wrong, this is bad, this fits. Maybe we don't need any of that. Maybe it's just stop. Let's collectively come to the center. Let's just get to the center, and then let's talk from there. Let's just find our way right to the middle, not worry about pointing fingers or ripping down this, or saying this is okay and this is not, or conservative views, more open-minded. Like, what can we get all of that off the table and just get to that center spot and then build from there? Like, now I'm super fucking fascinated. Excuse my French. Now, yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. And like, this is my personal belief, and other people would vehemently disagree or even, castigate me on this one. But I do think we all need to take a collective breath, and we need to really examine how we talk to each other and people who we don't agree with, and acknowledge, right? It's like if I take like a super liberal, and again, and I'm meaning this from literally the liberal, we'll say like a progressive mindset, which is that of change, right? In every society you have people, and I think there's a biology and there's some research on this too, of progressively minded people who are the ones who are saying, yeah, let's change. Then you have the conservatives like, all right, let's slow down. There's some things here, there is danger in change. There's, it's like the risk reward of making an investment, right? And, and then there's like, that fear of change and what's going to happen if we do this. And I think sometimes as the more progressively minded folks, where maybe it's a lot of the camp that we're sitting on, especially in mental health, it 99% skews towards, folks who are more liberal and progressive minded. And then we want to push that those beliefs onto other people. And I think there is a value in working towards that. But again, that really can become dysregulated. And like what you were saying too, if you look at it from like a historical perspective, anytime like there is radical change that happens too fast, it often goes very poorly. When you have one side that dominates the other in this massive change, and we tear down society structure and just say we're going to start anew, it's like bad things often happen. Like it's often a recipe for disaster. I think we could have some, and I think change is happening really fast, and it's often for the good. But I think we need to be more mindful and respectful of a lot of the people who are a little bit more fearful of that change, and have dialogue and not shame them or try to just beat them into submission, because at the end of the day, they don't appreciate that very much. And then that pushes them further into their own beliefs, even just out of disdain for you. And I think you see a lot of that happening, and it's like, hey, let's just look at it from like a political perspective. Like, hey, we've won, I'm not even going to say what political side I am, just because I don't like to put that in mental health. You can probably guess, but it's like, hey, we won, and look at that. And it's like, we're going to win forever. And then, then 4 years later, it's like you just get absolutely shellacked, and you're like, oh, wait, I probably should have not shamed the other side and had a conversation.
Right. This shouldn't be a war, right? Like, this isn't a war, right? Like, this is us as a collective, and those big events, or that trying to brute force a pathway for an idea or a specific change that, like you said, leaves the other people in their wake. That's a level of global or world level trauma to a certain sector of the species, right? Like, that's might not be an individual, abuse by a parent or something like that, but that can be traumatic, right? Am I wrong? Am I looking at that wrong? I would imagine like you really force a giant group, or you decide you're going to conquer another country and just force those people into your belief system. And that's traumatic for a large portion of the species.
Yeah, like at best, it's just like unpleasant and, just, consequential, and, just drives disdain. At worst, you have like communist Russia. Millions of people die. And there's plenty of examples. You have the French Revolution and communist Russia and, Maoist China. Yeah, you have, these examples of like these broad swaths, and just, and so I think the same, bringing it back to mental health and men and gender, it's like, I think you could have progressive change pretty quickly, but I think we need to be better at making the case as to why, and have better communication. Because that's the thing that pisses me off, honestly, the most about where we're at right now, is just like the style of communication on whether it's either side of the aisle. Or let's say, like, I look at my side and look at the most like progressive factions of that, and just the way that these things are communicated, and it's just all about fighting and a war, and we need to, and there you do need to have a fight for sure, but it's not necessarily just fighting the enemy, but it's fighting ideas, and how do we, like I was saying before, with some of my clients who take on those hyper masculine traits. I need to sometimes use masculinity. I need to fight masculinity with some of them, because if I'm like, the hippy dippy therapist who's like, no, we got to get in touch, I gotta be like, look, bro, like, this is why you need to do this. Here's my case, and they respect that, but also we need to respect why it is that they're doing that, and not, just saying, oh, you just took on these really toxic traits, and you need to drop all this, and it doesn't work that well. And I think we all need to take a breath and be mindful of how we're communicating, this to our male clients in treatment, and understanding the value in some of those traits, and that they had, and how important they were, and how important they, some of them still are in some ways. I think there's this idea, and I mean, I don't know how much I buy into this, but I think maybe there's some truth in it, but it's like, hard men make soft times and soft men make hard times. Have you ever heard that before? It's
No,
it's like a historical, right? But I think that's something that gets in vibe, right? And I love studying history, but it's like, you take someone like Genghis Khan, right, who grew up, in the harshest, in the steppe, and rose from nothing and built an army, this tough, cruel, just ice cold son of a gun, right, took over the world. And then what happens, right, in that region is like, then all of a sudden they become fat, happy, rich, and, just using that as a, just a figure of speech. And then their sons become, wearing silk robes, and then, or you could even look at that. It's used like in the World War II generation. The tough GIs went and they went and defeated the Nazis, and they were hard as hell. And now look how great we have it, right? And then it's like we soften up, and then we lose that. We don't have that hard work, that grit, or whatever, and then everything gets lost. And I don't know if there's really anything to that, but I think that goes to that general sense of like our understanding of masculinity, and that maybe there is some value in balance and having some of that of like, okay, yeah, I do maybe need to be strong, competitive, I have to let things bounce off me, but at the same time I could come home, put my feet up, have good, strong, close connections. And I think there is some, and that's some of the communication that I'll give to men as well, of like, this could actually help you, right? If you really want to like be successful, be a good provider, just like the workaholic saying, hey, like actually let's learn how to take a break and get some sleep and get some rest, and then go back in, and then you'll be more refreshed, ready to go. You live life more balanced, and you can actually in the long run be more successful. You could communicate that to men as well. If you're able to be vulnerable and shed some of the more harsh, tip of the spear, toxic masculinity, whatever you want to call it, that you can be strong, that it is okay. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
When you brought up both of you coming to center and centering, coming from my social work lens, and Evan, I don't know how engaged you are with the National Association of Social Workers, but our chapter does a really great job at doing anti-oppression practice, and they did a 3-part series training on becoming an anti-oppression informed practitioner, and part of that was every they would do a training, and then the next month they would do like an hour-long come together and process and just be together collectively and talk about those things that we're doing in practice. And part of that implementation was doing a centering exercise, which was really beautiful. And so when you guys say centering, I know you weren't meaning it in this way, but that's where my brain went, is so often we're on autopilot and we're just fighting the good fight and, trying to protect ourselves. But also we believe so firmly in these things that have kept us safe that we don't take the moment to, and like, where am I right now? What am I feeling in my body? Why is this important to me? What's the most important thing right now? We just go, go, go. And so that came to me as, a level of importance of how we make the change and how we make other people feel safe doing it, is going more toward that woo-woo yogi practice of just centering and being mindful,
And I think a lot of that too comes down to meeting people where they're at. That's the of it too, is not just me trying to be like, oh, I'm the expert, I'm the therapist, here's all the research, here's the mindful, it's like you have to meet them where they're at and slowly bring them closer to that point, and not do it in a way that's dysregulating and say, oh, hey, like, according to my education and knowledge and, emotionality and, what my field, the narrative that we imbibe, we're going to come in and we're going to shed you of this toxic masculinity, and we're going to have you, practicing yoga and incense and center, we're going to have you doing that right away. But yeah, I don't think that always works so well. And I agree with you that it is important to center, take a breath, and just have, and that's like something I'm pretty passionate about. I don't do like too many videos on it quite, but if you've been in my lives and stuff, that I like have that I'm writing a book and giving, it's all about communication. And so that's what's like really tough for me to see. And I think we are guilty of this as a profession, where we don't always have the best communication, or we take on a certain central narrative and then try to push others and try to fight other, kind of from this like activist lens, which like you need to have. But I think sometimes it's like you make the task, when you throw people's walls up, when you start attacking them and what they're doing, and you start from that, their walls are going up. Now, look, I could, be the strongest activist, and I'll go and I'll chip those walls, right, and we'll fight and we'll get things pushed and passed forward. But I think sometimes there is something to be said about taking a step back, taking a breath, acknowledging, validating, right? Because that's something we learn, right? And in our training, our education is how, validating, meeting people where they're at, holding people in, unconditional positive regard, right? That Rogerian motivational interviewing type, right? But then, so we believe that, but then we go and we try to, beat people into submission and challenge and question everything that they're coming in the room with. So I think that's why communication is so important. Just like the communication we try to teach between couples, can we do that better as a profession? So I feel like, okay, maybe we do a good job with that with clients, and I think most therapists are doing a good job, and especially when men come in the room, and a lot of times they feel more comfortable with a woman. I think sometimes right then and there, that could be helpful, where they feel okay. Whereas like a guy coming to a guy, I think there is some value in that of like, okay, the therapy room is the practice room. Okay, can you practice being vulnerable with another guy? So I think there's a different value inherent in that as well. But yeah, just being better at communicating. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So Evan, no, you're fine. Like you had mentioned, and kind of working to close out our show today.
Mm-hmm.
Those walls are up, and you can take the activist side, like you said, and just try to knock those walls down. But maybe to the conversation point of us coming to the center, we just want to get that person to unlock their door and open it up. So what do you think you could leave us with today that would help open that door?
Yeah, I think, when you go to someone and say, hey, everything you've been doing is wrong, up until this point, and this is why you're here, right? So I think going in and acknowledging, what brought you here, and saying, what you did was important, right? Some of these things, being tough, you needed that got you to where you are. Here are the good things you have, this is where it got you, but hey, here we are at such and such age. And, is there any of these things that we could let go? Has there been any downsides to that? And really exploring that with people, not coming at them and saying, hey, everything you've been doing is wrong, and validating the importance, and not attacking all of masculinity. And because even if it is true, I just don't think it's a helpful narrative to have. Mm-hmm. To attack everything about masculinity or anything about feminine or anything in general, and acknowledge why that is and why it's important, but why it is also now important for the society we're living in today to shed some of the more sharp edges of that, because it's really the sharp edges that hurt other people and then in turn come back and hurt ourselves. And so not tearing down the system, but acknowledging the importance of whatever that was, and then meeting them where they're at. And I think you could do that outside of a therapy setting as well. And I think as a society as a whole, I think there could be some benefit to that. So yeah, so I'd say meeting people where they're at, and acknowledging and validating, those defense mechanisms that were important for survival. And the last thing too, and I didn't necessarily mention this, but we have our instincts, we have our I call it like our lower nature, right? The part of our survival, our natural, right? And that's where our society has segmented off and where we get our norms from. It's these instincts that get taken to an extreme. And I tell clients this all the time is, that part of us is actually more powerful, right? Our inner animal, our instinct, our drive, our emotions, it's more powerful and autonomic, but we have this higher mind. As humans, we're blessed with this prefrontal cortex, with this ability to analyze, and we could hack our system, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can actually go in and, there's limits to this, but we don't have to be a slave to those instincts. And so as a man, we could then challenge those instincts and, from a cognitive approach, if you want to call it, work to saying, oh, wait, I don't need this for survival. I'm not on the savannah. This isn't 150 years ago. I do have agency and choice in how I approach life in a more mindful way. And for me, mindful, thoughtful. I'm putting thought into what I'm doing, and I'm not just reacting on instinct. And you could apply that to almost anything, but I think it's important to apply that, in these situations and working with men. That's kind of my final.
Evan, I love that you said that as a final closing, because I don't think the general public, general society understands that 95% of how we function day in and day out is subconscious. Like how infrequently 5% of our functioning we're actually cognitively presently aware and mindful and paying attention. And it's usually in times of like severe stress when we're forced to right? So I appreciate you leaving us with that. Tommy, anything else before we close out?
No, I think this was a great conversation, Evan. Very much appreciate your insight. Ladies, as always, for backing this kind of push and this kind of one corner of the world to potentially help tear down some of those, or open the door. I think we're going to open the door today. We're not going to tear anything down. So
Yeah, no, and honestly, I think, this was an awesome conversation, and I haven't really had this conversation with anybody, so it's like a lot of these thoughts came to me, and it's like probably stuff I was like, I've been like holding in like anger. I was able to get that out. And you know what, too, I think because especially of the culture that I'm in, right? I'm like, as a man, I'm in a very social work, right? Especially as a social worker, in general, LMFT, whatever, it's a very feminized. It is extreme, and so everything is looked at from that lens. And sometimes it would be, that's why I probably don't talk about a lot of this stuff as much as I'm afraid, right? And I've actually gotten a lot of backlash too when I brought some of these topics off. So then I'm just like, okay, well, fuck it. I'm just not going to say anything, where, challenging some of the greater of society, or talking about how, some of these things for men, it's like, it is okay and not everything. And so then hearing, and maybe Kelsey and Amanda on the inside are just like, but no, you were, like you acknowledge, and I think it feels good too from it, like to, have that support and acknowledge like, hey, yeah, that is okay. And yeah, maybe there are some greater changes that need to be made as a society. It is validating, for me as someone, as a man in this profession that skews much more feminine and has that lens and approach, and everything is viewed through that. It is good to be able to have these conversations in a, even if you don't agree with everything I'm saying, in a non-judgmental kind of way. Feels good too. So I think this is really, really cool conversation for sure.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, we appreciate it. So everyone, like I said, go back and watch Evan's previous episode and go follow him on TikTok, Evan the Counselor. He has his own YouTube channel, Evan the Counselor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, go find him on all the socials. And then as always, subscribe, leave us comments. If you have any questions for Evan specifically, we'll make sure they get back to him. We are still confirming our guests for next week, so I'm sorry I can't give you the heads up of who we're going to be chatting with next week, but as always, stay tuned, and it was good to see everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.